Welcome to Cinemaholics. Well, look, Cinemaholics listeners, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is Will Ashton is on vacation, so he's not going to be on the next couple clips or reviews of Cinemaholics. We're doing a little bit of a thing where, and this is the bad news, we're doing a thing where we're doing a few bonus reviews here instead of one big episode. I know it's inconvenient, but we're doing our best because Will, he's out of town. And so we're getting this break from Will. I mean, he's getting this break from the dog days of doing Cinemaholics. But you know what? Let's lean into some even better news. And that's that we have a special guest here to talk about the new movie Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe Origins. First, I'll say I'm John Agroni. You know that. But with me, I have a fantastic film writer, guy I know, to Adonis Gonzalez.
I honestly thought you were going to say this was the worst news.
No, of course not. Why would I say something untrue? I wouldn't lie to the listeners like that.
No, that's true. That's true.
We're going to talk about Snake Eyes, which is a G.I. Joe movie spin-off thing. First, let's say some of you might be listening and you're like, G.I. Joe, the action figures? What are you talking about? Well, yes, Hasbro has been making G.I. Joes, these action figures, since the 60s. There was a cartoon back in, I want to say the 80s or 70s, whenever that was. I never watched the original, like, classic cartoon. Did you?
No, I honestly did not know it was that old. The 60s? Wow.
Well, the action figures are from the 60s. I think the cartoon was like later, you know? Like, I think the animated shows were back in, like...
Probably 80s,
maybe
right?
the 80s. Yeah, that sounds about... Because the 80s is, like, when the action figure cartoon era really made itself a thing, right?
That's like Thundercats and Transformers and
He-Man.
Yeah, I think G.I. Joe was a part of that whole thing.
G.I. Joe was part of it.
He-Man, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so they've made a bunch of G.I. Joe like reboots and all of this stuff. There've been other animated shows. Did you grow up with any G.I. Joe content? Like I know there was stuff like on like Saturday morning they would always every once in a while be like the new G.I. Joe, and it'd be like a totally new thing, right?
Yeah, I was aware of it as a kid. It never really, I was a He-Man kid. I had all the He-Man toys. That was my thing. So, like G.I. Joe and Thundercats, I never really paid much attention to, but I know there was like reruns of the show on like Disney Channel or Cartoon Network. And I know I've seen toys growing up. So it was definitely still a pretty relevant part of my childhood. I just didn't pay much attention to it.
Yeah. You know what? I was about the same. Because I was more of a Transformers kid, and Transformers and Voltron, those were my like 80s cartoon shows that I got into. Oh, and Care Bears. Can't forget Care Bears.
Oh yeah, Care Bears is a classic.
Yeah, if you want the real action, that's where that was. Yeah, it's funny too because G.I. Joe and Transformers were always kind of like locked in, you know, a battle for cultural relevance. But what's funny about that is there was going to be a G.I. Joe film, like a live action film, before there was going to be a Transformers one. Did you know this?
I did not know this.
Yeah. Paramount, which has the film rights to both G.I. Joe and Transformers, was going to make a G.I. Joe movie. You know, like they were going to make G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra like years before they did. It was going to be like in the mid 2000s, but they ended up making Transformers first instead because of the war in Iraq. Because America was invading Iraq, and then worldwide sentiment was, you know, America imperialistic, you know, and so they were rightfully kind of looking at they were reading the room.
They're like, let's rain check that one. Let's do the funny robots for a bit.
Let's delay the discourse. But what's funny about that though is like, so Transformers comes out in 2007 and is loaded with like American military stuff anyway. So there you go. But I guess they do kind of portray the military in that movie as a bit feckless. Like I know that they have the one guy, what's his name? I always forget his name.
Josh Duhamel.
Josh Duhamel, yeah, Duhamel,
and Tyrese Gibson. You know, we can't.
Yeah, that's right. Tyrese is in that.
Can't forget Tyrese.
Yeah, they're kind of like, they're not useless, but they're definitely, I don't know, they definitely kind of get around the whole like American military thing by just making them action heroes who aren't as good as the Transformer heroes. It's fine.
There's a moment in this movie that kind of calls back to that whole thing. Yeah, for me at least. Okay,
well we'll have to talk about that in a moment. But yeah, so G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra comes out 2009. I remember watching this in the theater. You know, it was the discount theater. Calm down. I didn't go opening night. I wasn't that crazy. But I did see Rise of Cobra with a group of friends. And you know what? I dug it. I dug the first G.I. Joe. I thought it was a fun story. I thought they did some clever, sharp things with the character reveals. It wasn't as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. Simple movie. It's like an overextended chase scene with some really weird tech, but it has Channing Tatum. It has Marlon Wayans. Dennis Quaid is in it, right? Ray Park is in it. Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I was into it. Did you see Rise of Cobra? Were you into it?
I did see it, and I know this isn't going to make much sense. I do remember being into it a lot. I remember seeing it with my dad and liking it because I remember specific moments, like the scene with Channing Tatum and Marlon Wayans, where they kind of get the super suits and they toy around with them for a bit. And that was kind of my first big introduction to G.I. Joe because, like I said, I didn't really have it around as much as a kid. So that was kind of the first big G.I. Joe thing I had ever really seen. But like looking back on it, that and the sequel, I can't really remember much from them. And I don't know if that's just because it's been a while since I've seen them or if they just didn't really leave much of a lasting effect. But I do remember liking the first one way more than the second one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was going to bring up Retaliation, which is way more forgettable. I've only seen both movies once, and Retaliation came out 2013. So 4 years later, it was a direct sequel. And I honestly, the only thing I remember about Retaliation was that Channing Tatum is only in it for a bit, and then his character gets killed off.
Yeah,
spoiler alert, I guess. It doesn't really matter. I mean, and then The Rock becomes the main guy. Bruce Willis kind of pops in. That's the last thing I really remember about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a huge surprise because they really sold it like it was going to be Channing Tatum, The Rock, and Bruce Willis as like this sort of action powerhouse trio.
Yeah,
and then it gets threat. And Marlon Wayans I think is just not in the movie at all. I don't even think they
mention him. Yeah. I think Scarlett might be in the movie still, but yeah, I mean they're still doing the like Zartan or whatever is like the president or something. Right. I don't know. There wasn't much to
something,
it.
Yeah.
But Rise of Cobra, you know what, Adonis? I remember so much about that movie. I remember the suits, like you mentioned. I remember the flashbacks. I remember how hammy it was. I remember Baroness was like, she used to be good. Now she's evil. Scarlett, she has like this will they, won't they with the Marlon Wayans character. Right. And the thing I remember the most about both of these movies was Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Yin and Yang. They were the reason to go see these movies, I think, to like risk it all.
100%.
Because their action, their rivalry, whenever the movie was getting kind of boring, it was getting a little bit like, okay, yeah, Snake Eyes would show up. And that's when I would show up.
Right, exactly. That's when I would check back in. Oh, okay, I'm watching a movie.
Yeah, we're in good hands. Right. Stephen Sommers directed the first movie, and I think he was perfect directing choice. This is a guy who made the first two Mummy movies. That was kind of his thing. He was good at, and he also made Van Helsing. He was good at taking like movies that don't have like the best idea. Maybe they're trying to like adapt something from something that doesn't adapt easily. That's kind of his like forte. I remember when I was a kid, I watched Adventures of Huck Finn. He also made that, and that was a good movie, I think. It's been a while. But then G.I. Joe Retaliation. Do you remember who directed this, Adonis? I was surprised when I saw this because I forgot.
I'm gonna guess Jerry Schumacher. Bruckheimer, not Schumacher. Sorry.
I was about to say Schumacher. I think you have the subconscious right answer because you said Chu mistakenly, but it is John M. Chu who directed this.
My gut told me, but I didn't listen.
John Chu, director of Crazy Rich Asians, which, if you'll recall, Crazy Rich Asians stars Henry Golding, who is in this new movie we're about to talk about. John Chu most recently directed In the Heights. He also did Step Up to the Streets, which is probably the best Step Up movie. But then he also did Step Up 3D, which is not as great. Yeah. But yeah, John Chu directed it. And I just, good director. I don't think it was the right fit.
No, it's weird. It's very weird. I would not have guessed John Chu, considering his prior filmography and even his current filmography. That kind of feels like the black sheep. And he did Jim and the Holograms too, so that really knocks it out the park.
Yeah, so these two G.I. Joe movies, they weren't like massive hits, I don't think. Like, especially Retaliation, but even Rise of Cobra, I think like critics kind of gave it a pass. They're like, yeah, it's not great, but it's okay. And it made a decent amount of money. It made like $300 million worldwide, which was enough to sort of maybe break even, basically, because it had a pretty big budget, especially for 2009. And I think what they were trying to do, they were trying to sort of carve out a new action franchise for this decade. They lost to Marvel. Marvel had already come out with Iron Man at this point, and we know what happens next. G.I. Joe, Transformers, they really just fizzle out over the next few years and they just don't have that same Marvel staying power. Like, these things are flashes in the pan. Like, nobody's really clamoring for more G.I. Joe content the way they're clamoring for more Marvel and DC content. So what do you do? And I think that their choice here is kind of a predictable one, right? They decide, we're going to reboot this whole thing. We're going to reset the deck. And maybe we're gonna take it a little bit slower, because the first G.I. Joe is kind of like an origin story. It's an origin story for Cobra. It's an origin story for, I guess, Duke, right? And they don't really have all the Joe stuff figured out. Some of the Joes are doing their thing, some aren't. This movie is even more of like an origin story. It's literally called G.I. Joe Origins, and they are banking it all on arguably the coolest character. Not arguably. Adonis, he's the coolest character. Snake Eyes, can we agree on that? Without a doubt. Yeah.
Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are the two best G.I. Joe characters.
I mean, in our opinions, and I think a lot of people would share that opinion. And I think this is such a bold, we are just going for it kind of idea, which is we're going to show you how Snake Eyes becomes Snake Eyes. And the thing that people loved about Snake Eyes in those first two movies, the fact that he doesn't talk and he always wears a mask, forget that ever happened. Because he's not going to be Snake Eyes. Like, his name is Snake Eyes in this. It's the only name he has. And we find out why he has that name. And, sure, it's kind of a weird origin, but it works. And we're going to get a version of this character who he's never in the suit. That's not the point. But we see how he becomes the, like, guy who doesn't talk as much. But I guess, I don't know what they're really going for there. Like, I don't know. I think they're just doing a new thing with Snake Eyes entirely. Like, what I'm saying is, I don't think this version of Snake Eyes is ever meant to be really the Snake Eyes we've seen in other G.I. Joe stuff before. I think that's the point.
No, I don't think so either. I think that calling this G.I. Joe Origins and kind of like marketing it as a, well, no, they're actually, I think they're marketing more of as a reboot, aren't they? I don't think they've really.
They are.
Yeah, they've never said it was a prequel. And it kind of shows. Watching this movie, I didn't really see any correlation between this and like the Channing Tatum, Dwayne Johnson G.I. Joes.
Mm-hmm. This is Bumblebee.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
This is what they did with Bumblebee. They're like, okay, we're gonna take a very cliched, tropey like story, probably on like 20 scripts we have in our bank right now, and then we're just going to put Snake Eyes into the character's name.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they're doing here. And that's what, what? It worked with Bumblebee. I do not blame them, because Bumblebee kind of refreshed the Transformers franchise. I mean, it's been 3 years since Bumblebee came out, but
wow, 3 years.
I mean, it kind of worked. Like, it made people interested in Transformers again. And I think that was the plan with Snake Eyes. And we're about to talk about it. A few things I want to set up here. We've been doing a lot of setup. Like I mentioned already, Henry Golding, Crazy Rich Asians, he's Snake Eyes in this. He's kind of trying to get away from the romantic comedy stuff. He was in Last Christmas. He was in Crazy Rich Asians. They kind of had him in like the dark comedy, A Simple Favor. He was kind of doing something a little bit different in that movie. But here he is kind of as like an anti-hero a little bit. He's a bit of a roguish guy. When we meet him, he is a brawler, right? And one thing I like about this movie is that they kind of subvert what we know about Snake Eyes, because we know, like, we meet him and we're like, okay, yeah, eventually he's going to become like a bona fide superhero. It's kind of like what X-Men First Class does. It's like, okay, yeah, we know Magneto is going to become a villain. We know what's going to happen here, but they're like, okay, but we're going to have fun along the way. Like, you're going to see his journey. You're going to see what he goes through. And the story here is that his dad gets killed when he's a little kid. He wants to get vengeance on the guy who did it. And the only people willing to help him are these crime bosses who work with the Yakuza. And so he gets entangled in a plot with them. He eventually shifts gears and starts working for this Shadow Clan in Japan. And it's all this convoluted stuff. But the point is, he's kind of bouncing from person to person, trying to find his purpose. And we know what the purpose is. It's like, yeah, dude, you're going to join the G.I. Joes, and it's going to be amazing. And I know there's a fourth film they've been talking about making called G.I. Joe Ever Vigilant, which I don't know what that's going to be. I don't know if that's still happening. But the point is, we get a new sort of take on Snake Eyes. He did get an origin in Rise of Cobra, if I recall. He was played by a white kid, right? Or he was a white character, even though he wears the mask all the time.
He was played by that kid from Kickin' It.
Okay, you remember better than I do.
That might be the generational gap between us, I think.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, but I remember, I told you, Rise of Cobra is a memorable movie. I remember, like, yeah, he like has the same master kind of guy, and then Storm Shadow was like his like rival, and
right.
he resents Snake Eyes for, you know, appropriating Asian culture. That's the subtext. And here they do something different, where Henry Golding is an Asian American, and he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't really he's like a ghost in the world. He doesn't have like, you know, they kind of basically say he doesn't have like an identity. He just sort of appeared in the world one day, and we find out why eventually. But the point is, he goes to Japan, and, you know, the guy who like kind of takes him in, he is played by Andrew Koji, who is a really skilled kind of martial artist in real life. He's like a stuntman. Also a British actor. He was in the HBO Max series Warrior, which I haven't seen, but I've heard is fantastic. But he plays kind of like the leader of the clan. His name is Tommy. And his whole deal is that he has this responsibility of guarding this crystal thing, and he believes that Snake Eyes can sort of help become like this guardian warrior for their clan. It's a big movie, a lot going on, a lot of swords, a lot of action scenes. But Adonis, what did you think of Snake Eyes overall? Were you pleased with this latest G.I. Joe movie?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I really was. You mentioned earlier the connection to Bumblebee. And in my opinion, I think at least for me, I think it's a little too early to sort of see where the general consensus is. But I am definitely much more invested in the G.I. Joe franchise, and I think starting off with Snake Eyes was a really smart move, a predictable move, like you said, yeah, but I think a really smart move, because he's kind of the only Joe that I know of that kind of has like a different sort of thing going on. The rest of them are kind of just like gung-ho, like soldiers, I guess, and I could be
we're
wrong.
On the mission,
right? Exactly.
Yeah, they're always focused on the mission. They don't have this, because Snake Eyes always has the backstory. He always has like the side stuff with Storm Shadow.
Right, exactly. Even in the first two movies, yeah. But I really liked it. I thought it was a really fun action movie. I love how Henry Golding and Andrew Koji kind of bounce off each other. Their friendship and sort of rivalry was like really, really. It was really cool to see. Like I really believed it. The only like big issue I have with it isn't even like anything to do with like the plot or the predictability, or that it's kind of like safe. It's like just the shaky cam sort of thing. I don't really know what that's called, but that practice of just having that action shaky cam that we've seen in like John Wick and Winter Soldier, where it can be really cool. Like if you use it, like I think sparingly, like I think that's sort of a thing that you use when you're like, oh, look at what this character can do. Look at these moves and stuff. But it's used a lot in scenes that aren't even fighting scenes, I think. And it kind of gets a little nauseating, pretty early on in the movie, and it doesn't really stop.
I mean, with John Wick, it's not that shaky. Right, not even the Bourne movies are as shaky it's really as this one. And you know, I've been thinking a lot about this, because we should say critics they've been bringing their knives, their katanas out for this one. They aren't liking this movie. They aren't into it, and I understand why. Because again, it's sort of taking the elements people like the most about Snake Eyes and kind of just changing them, just kind of doing something totally different. And I think a lot of people would look at it and kind of like you said, putting in this like predictable screenplay where it's like, okay, yeah. The reason I'm okay with this movie, and I am a little torn, I think it's so weird, because kind of jumping off what, you know, building on what you're saying, it's bad at the thing that you want from it, but it's surprisingly good at the thing you don't expect from it. The thing you don't expect from this movie is for the characters to be kind of fun, and for a lot of the production design to be very dynamic. Like the actual plot, it is pretty predictable and safe. Like we kind of know that, but I think the movie is aware that we know where everything is headed, and so it's just sort of focusing on making the journey all the more worthwhile. There are moments in this movie where something would happen to a character, and like I know what the end result's going to be, but it would surprise me in how we got there. I think that's where it kind of kept me like engaged, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to say the exact scene, but there's a scene where he goes through a certain challenge and we're like, okay, yeah, we know he's going to make it through the challenge because otherwise the movie would end. But then the way that he gets through it is, well, it's not really about what makes, you know, the Snake Eyes character usually fun, which is he always wins. You know, he's basically invincible. He has all the plot armor. This movie is like, yeah, we know he's strong. We know that he's cool to watch in a fight. But what if he had some personal growth? What if he went on like a dramatic journey that was beyond just being stronger than other people, but was more about who he is as a person? That to me is like why the movie actually works. But then, yeah, the action scenes, which it seems to almost avoid, are just flat out terrible. Like, they're terrible action scenes. And people have been saying like, oh, you know, the choreography is really good. The stunt work is really good. And the shaky cam is what ruins it. I think what ended up happening here is they shot this, and I think in the editing, there were just things that did not, like, I think it would have looked even worse if they hadn't have edited the way they did. I think they're hiding a lot of issues. I think that they're hiding places where their budget couldn't take care of, like with CGI, certain moments, because you can tell there was just some sloppy directing here. I think the director, I think the writing here from Evan Spiliotopoulos, he's the one who really was behind the story. He has a few co-writers and stuff, but the guy directing the film, I think, is just not very good at action. Like, I think that is pretty safe to say. And it's Robert Schwentke who made Red. Did you ever see Red with Bruce Willis?
It did, yeah.
See, with that movie, it's the same freaking thing. I don't remember the action in that movie. I remember just being passable. The thing I remember about that movie are the characters, the side characters, and like the moments, you know, not the set pieces.
It's that thing where you don't expect the shining, like the best part of the movie to be the acting, but it really is. Because I mean, like I said, Henry Golding and Andrew Koji and everyone really, Haruka Abe, who plays a character called Akiko in the movie. She's kind of a member of like,
she's like the security chief.
Yeah, exactly. And she, I wasn't expecting her to have such a huge part, but she did, and it worked really well. I think they all bounced really well off of each other, and I wasn't expecting so much heart and so much drama in this admittedly very predictable story. And I think that's kind of what separates it from other movies that have a similar sort of vibe going on, but it just doesn't feel like... It feels like the people making it know that there's not a lot going on here. And the difference with Snake Eyes for me, I think, is they saw what they had and they ran with it. And it might not have been perfect. There was definitely a lot less action and not a lot of great action, but I think that it told a really great origin story. And I'm really excited to see where they take the character next. I just think they need to maybe try some different direction in the future if they're going to continue with this.
I could see that happening. I mean, this is a way lower budget than the G.I. Joe entries previous. I mean, it only cost, they're reporting around an $88 million budget. That's really low for a film at this size. And I think that's because they didn't want to roll the dice on something so big that it would fail pretty easily.
Oh man.
You mentioned Akiko, played by Haruka Abe, and I kind of have a big complaint with this character, and I think that she starts off very promising. She has a lot of agency. She is very intelligent, and she isn't quick to trust. And her character arc kind of starts off in a really solid place, but then it just gets to the point where her character basically revolves around the fact that she thinks Henry Golding is attractive, and that kind of, on the one hand, I get it. He is. Like, I mean, look, he's one of the most beautiful men on the planet.
Right.
I get why that has to kind of happen there. But it did kind of bother me because I was like, they kind of squandered the goodwill they built up with that character. And I'd say that I liked the presence of some of the other like clan masters. You know, we have Iko Uwais, who is kind of fun to watch here. You know, he's just like really like just strong, you know, practically invincible weapons master. We also have, the blind master guy.
Oh, Peter Mensa.
Peter Mensa, thank you. He kind of guides the story along, but it does represent something about this movie that it will trip a lot of people up, and that's the cliches. It's like, okay, yeah, we have the blind master, but he has superhuman abilities even though he's blind. There's a lot of like really tired like Yakuza Asian cinema tropes of like They're not going to shoot guns. They're going to run at you with swords in the air, screaming all dramatically. And it happens a lot. And there were just so many moments in this where I was like, okay, I think we can do better. You know, Takehiro Hira, who is fantastic actor. He is one of the guys here. I think he kind of like sells the weirdness of this movie in a really compelling way. He plays like the main bad guy. Mm-hmm. But then also we kind of have a bunch of G.I. Joe stuff getting into the toy box, right? I wasn't expecting it to be as prominent, but you know, we have, you know, Scarlet. Yeah. The new Scarlet played by Samara Weaving. I knew Weaving was in the movie. I didn't know who she was playing. And then we also have Baroness played by Úrsula Corberó, who I think is not bad, you know? No. Not terrible.
Not as kind of imposing, I would say, as the previous Baroness actor.
I'm trying to remember who that was.
I don't remember who it was.
I think Sienna Miller was in the movie, but I don't remember if that's who she played. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, this is actually the moment I had mentioned earlier that kind of, when you were talking about Transformers and like the role of like the army guys, this kind of felt like that, because it kind of just, I expected it because I knew I was watching a G.I. Joe movie. It came at a certain part, and I want to avoid too much spoilers. But it just came at a certain point in the movie where I was like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I forgot this is a G.I. Joe origin movie. And then the movie was like, oh, we're going to make sure you don't forget that. And then mm-hmm. It just throws this stuff to exposition that kind of derailed it for me for a second. But I knew it was coming. I know they have to kind of build up this universe, and studios, for whatever reason, just kind of always choose one particular scene in a movie to just throw all of this stuff at you. And it's like, I mean, even Marvel does it from time to time, and it's like, whoa, okay. Let's calm down.
I looked it up. Sienna Miller did play Baroness.
All right, you're right. Cool.
Once again, and you know, I have to mention this whenever Sienna Miller comes up, I do not know what this woman looks like. I have seen her in many films, and she's given incredible performances, and she probably is the nicest person. Everyone in her life loves her. There's nothing wrong with her. I just I can't recognize her face. I don't get it. I'm sorry, and I apologize, but yeah, anyway. So Evan Spiliotopoulos, he's made some bad movies as a screenwriter, Adonis. In fact, I think by default, this is probably his best screenplay. Can I say that? Here are some of his other screenplays. Charlie's Angels, 2019.
Oh.
Yeah. Forgot about that one with Kristen Stewart?
Yeah, I did.
Beauty and the Beast, 2017. One of the worst Disney films in the last decade, in my opinion.
That's 2 for 2 on terrible reboots, yeah.
Here's what, this one's not as bad. Huntsman Winter's War. Not good. Not terrible. It's kind of like the Baroness of these.
Yeah, exactly.
It's around there. Hercules, 2014. The Dwayne Johnson, Brett Ratner directed. Yeah, which I'm gonna give Evan a little bit of credit here. And I think a lot of the issues with Hercules were Brett Ratner, not really the screenplay. Some of his other movies I haven't even seen. Battle for Terra, never even heard of it. Pooh's Heffalump movie, I don't know. And then The Jungle Book 2, which I guess we got to give that one a bit of a curve, because that's an animated film. It's Disney Toon Studios. That was his first, the dude is just getting started.
Right.
But yeah, what do you think of that filmography there as a screenwriter?
It's varied. I'll say that.
You know what? Oh, but we got to give him this. Sorry, I forgot to mention. He also helped out with The Lion King 1.5, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, The Three Musketeers. Yeah. Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, which is actually good.
Pretty good, yeah.
Unironically good. And then Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure. And I think a lot of people believe most of the Tinkerbell, like standalone animated movies, kind of good.
Yeah, I actually hear from grown friends of mine that's like the best one. I haven't watched any of the Tinkerbell movies, not because I think they're for kids. I haven't gotten around to them.
Mm-hmm. His next screenplay is going to be for Maleficent 3. So
Maleficent 3? Oh.
Yeah, they're not done. I thought that story was over just because they ran that plot into the ground twice. No.
Oh, absolutely not.
But back to G.I. Joe.
Right.
Back to Snake Eyes. I just want to reemphasize, the Henry Golding of it all. I really like this actor.
Oh yeah.
He's not great in this movie just because I think his accent, he kind of loses it from time to time. I kind of wonder,
Yes.
like,
My gosh.
did maybe do another take, or maybe just let him be British. I think they really wanted to go for that like Asian American going to an Asian place kind of thing, which was also a Crazy Rich Asian sort of thing. And so I get it, but his American accent, it's not ideal.
There are moments when he's talking to Haruka Abe and she has a British accent, and
yeah.
He'll kind of spill out of it. I don't even think,
because he's hearing it in real time.
Right.
This might be a conspiracy theory, but I'm pretty sure they had to like dub over some of his dialogue, because there were times where they cut away from him talking, and it kind of feels like they might have done some trickery there, because they might have had to like redub his voice, because I think he slips in and out of it. But yeah, he holds his own in terms of like the stunt fighting and like the action content here against Andrew Koji, who, I mean, it works in the sense that he, like I mentioned before, he's a bit more of a brawler. He's more of an underdog in this movie, which helps that dynamic. And then when you see him kind of like going toe to toe with other characters who have way more training, it kind of sells like that he's not just going to like win constantly. It's a neat little like, you know, way for them to turn like a disadvantage of the movie into basically an advantage. But all that said, people really just don't love this movie, right? They just don't quite. They're not clicking with what Snake Eyes is cooking. So Adonis, what do you think? Who do you think are the people who are going to get into this movie? Because I expect some people aren't going to like this either, and I want to make sure we're recommending it, because it seems like we both like it more than the average person. So what's your theory on this?
That's really tough. I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone who is like a huge G.I. Joe fan, right? Because as we mentioned before, they are taking some liberties with the character. There's a good chunk of G.I. Joe like fan service in the movie, but it's certainly not the main focus. I don't think. I think they're really trying to do something new with G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
I would probably recommend this to just action junkies, honestly, people who really enjoyed like old martial arts films or Matrix movies, stuff like that are kind of...
Can I push back on that though? Because I think they'll get frustrated because the action here is not very good.
That's true.
The action's tough to sit through at times. It's not all terrible, but like, man, it's rough.
It is. Yeah, I think that's why it's not doing so well. It's a really tough one to sell, because you don't want to go up to someone who's an action junkie and go, oh, it's supposed to be an action movie, but there's actually a lot of like drama and character in it, because they're going to be like, oh, gross, I don't want that. And it's kind of hard to do the opposite, because there's a lot of stuff in the movie that is admittedly very distracting and kind of negative. I didn't see it as negative as a lot of these critics are seeing it as, I guess. I don't know. Who would you recommend it to if you had to?
I was hoping you would answer that for me, because I generally don't know, because I think you're right about how like hyper fans of Snake Eyes are just going to be like, this isn't the Snake Eyes I know. And I mean, at least if you're warned ahead of time, like if the poster didn't tell you that, hopefully this will tell you that. Like we'll be able to get that out of the way. I guess like maybe there's just this weird subset of people who liked the first G.I. Joe movie like we did.
Right.
They just kind of, like I think why I'm giving this movie a pass is because I'm not a huge G.I. Joe fan. Like, we've already established I wasn't that into the cartoon. I don't care about these characters. My favorite thing with G.I. Joe is G.I. Jeff from Community, like
right.
That was pretty cool. And like how that sort of like parodied the G.I. Joe thing. I don't think it's an inherently interesting setup for a movie franchise, honestly. They're just sort of like weapons experts who go on these like big missions. It's like, it's kind of already what we get with Marvel,
Right.
Like they have this superhero thing, but it's like a mixture of a lot of different things, because they have the Captain America, Black Widow stuff, which is basically this, but they of course have the Marvel machine behind it, and they've got like a formula that's sort of foolproof, at least at this point. Compared to this, which I think they're experimenting, they're trying different things, and I'm responding positively to that experimentation, and I'm giving it a lot of slack, because it's the same thing we were talking about with Space Jam last week. You weren't there, but I was kind of
wish
like,
I could have been.
Matt Serafini and I were hanging out, and we were just like, look, yes, it's a commercial for Warner Brothers, but they need all the marketing they can get. I mean, look at what they're up against. And it's like, if we get Ralph Breaks the Internet, we can get this sort of thing, you know? And
yeah.
Paramount, I support them trying to be this brazen.
Right. And I'm not going to turn this into a Space Jam podcast, but like my quick thoughts on that. It's like there hasn't really been a time where Warner Brothers hasn't really sold itself. I think the Looney Tunes have always kind of been like the characters they poke fun of Warner Brothers, like their own family studio. So it didn't really.
Cartoon Network was way better about it. Cartoon Network just like, you know, constantly sold us with like all these characters live together in this city. It was fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah, those commercials were great. But yeah. Can I get a little spoilery? Because there is like a gripe I have kind of with the end of the movie, but I don't want to get.
Well, let's give our final grades. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about it. So we're gonna give our final grades here. I'm a B- on Snake Eyes. Look, it's not a surefire hit, but I think that maybe, you know, I didn't watch the trailer going in. I went in kind of fresh, but I imagine the trailer is pretty accurate to what kind of movie you're getting. I think this is one of those movies where watch the trailer. If you're kind of turned off by it, I don't think this film will salvage anything for you. But if you are reasonably curious about it and you want to see something in the theater and it's safe to do so, and you know, you could do way worse by summer action movies, I think it's a better chance of you having a good time than apparently Space Jam, which I think a lot of people just aren't responding positively to, even compared to this one. We'll see. But yeah, B- for me. What about you?
Yeah, it's definitely a B- for me too. If you're willing, I didn't see the trailers either. I'm sure they're very indicative of what kind of movie you're watching. But if you're willing to just walk into this movie and sort of accept the fact that the action's not going to be on par with what you're expecting, but kind of open your mind up and your heart up a little bit, and allow the movie to sort of show you what it's working with. You know, I think you'll at least have a good time with Snake Eyes. I don't know if you'll like it, but I don't think you'll walk away going, ugh, that was a waste of time. You know, I think it's a fun movie.
All right. Well, yeah, it's some pretty qualified, you know, caveated recommendations from us. That's for sure. But a B- is still a B-. That is a positive grade, and I'm happy to say that. I'm glad I had fun with this one, and I hope other people do too. But let's open this spoiler thing up real quick here, and then we'll finish out. Adonis, what did you want to say? Get it off your chest. Spoilers from here on out.
Okay, so I want to see if I'm the only one thinking like this, because this is probably my hugest issue with the movie. I loved Henry Golding, and I loved Andrew Koji. I loved their interactions throughout the entire movie. This brotherly bond that they create, but it's
brotherly, but they should have kissed.
Yeah, but come on. They may be experimenting, but we're not getting that to at least G.I. Joe 3.
Yeah, I think this has the Point Break problem where all the chemistry is with these guys, and that's not a problem. It's just a problem that they try to avoid it.
They keep getting so close to each other's faces. They know what they're doing.
Yeah. They know what they want to do.
Right. But I just don't. To me, it didn't really sell it to me, the breaking point of their relationship. I understood what it was going for, you know, this story of like redemption and revenge, and how even the most noble of us can like fall privy to it, and even the lowest of us can overcome it and stuff. Like, I thought, okay, that's cool. I get it. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are core characters to do that with. But I don't know if maybe they just didn't spend enough time with Tommy, and they didn't really spend enough time with their relationship, because, you know, there was all this stuff about like Snake Eyes doing what he's doing, and the Joes coming in, and Takehiro Hira wanting to take over the clan, that there just wasn't a lot of space for that kind of exploration into the relationship. But when it got to the point where Tommy has that breakdown, I almost didn't really believe it, and I definitely didn't believe that it would lead to him doing what he did at the end, like joining the Baroness and everything. It didn't. Were you sold by that? I wasn't really.
I actually, you know what? I disagree. Yeah. I think that they hint at it throughout the movie that he has sort of changed for the worse, because at some point he was, you know, the pure of heart guy who could survive the challenges, right? But I think that from the first scene we see, when he has a chance to escape with his life, when he has a chance to go with, you know, with Snake Eyes and escape in that big Yakuza fight, he chooses vengeance instead. And he's a hypocrite in this movie. He wants to bring down his relative out of vengeance, and he has the same character journey as Henry Golding. And I think that is the key to why they relate to each other and why they trust each other at first, but then they fall out, of course. And I think that falling out comes down to he has to blame someone for everything falling apart. He can't blame the villain anymore. The villain is now dead. So he has to blame Snake Eyes, and rightfully so. I actually think it really works because this gets into my issue with the ending, which is that all is too easily forgiven with this guy. Like, they just let him go, and they give him a gift, right? This dude, because of him, first of all, nearly put what the equivalent of a nuclear weapon into the hands of terrorists willingly, had multiple chances not to do that, and also, because of him, a lot of people died. A lot of people that they knew. A lot of people who were part of this clan dead because of him. So I look at Tommy and I'm like, yeah, of course he's mad at him. He took everything away from him. He caused the death of people he cares about. But everybody else is like, yeah, even though you caused this, you helped us out. You had a change of heart. You're good. And they try to get around it. They try to be like, well, yeah, but he survived the snake pit, so that shows them that he's changed. Okay. But I think that on top of the fact that I just think that his villainy throughout the movie, it's a very rushed redemption arc. And for the most part, during the movie, I was into it because I was like, you know what? That's actually kind of cool that they're letting him just keep being evil. He doesn't have this moment where he's like, hey, I'm going to stop being evil. I'm going to fess up to you. The liar reveal thing, right? Where he lies throughout the film, reveals it, and then we have the sort of like end of the second act thing. Instead, he's like, he never owns up to it. Instead, he just goes through with the evil. And that to me is like, yeah, that's an anti-hero. That is a guy who he's not necessarily evil, but he's willing to let himself be corrupted. He's willing to do that for his own selfish gains. And I'm like, yes, that is an actually good way to do this character because it is different. The problem is that then they try to retcon it, like within the same movie. I think you need a whole other movie for him to sort of get past what he did. And the last thing I'll say was Storm Shadow. I think that it actually makes sense. They did something smart to push him into the Cobra thing because they show that his anger was with the Yakuza, not with Cobra. And because the villain betrays Baroness, I think that was the whole point of that, was so that it would make sense for him to want to join Cobra because they were, they aren't necessarily tied to the people who are central to what he is sort of, you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I definitely agree with you. Especially the stuff with Snake Eyes. I think I was looking for a little more time with that, with that internal struggle with Storm Shadow. But I also am probably asking for a lot because, for one, it wasn't really his movie; it was Snake Eyes' movie, and they did have a lot to do. And I think that they played that anti-hero role really well up until the end, like you said. And I almost want them to sort of keep playing with it, not just with Snake Eyes, but like, and I know they won't do this, but like, I would love to see this experiment turn into sort of a deeper look into the Joes, and like I'm really into, it might just be because I'm really into shows like Invincible and The Boys and stuff, but I really like sort of having that discussion about like good versus evil and like the morally gray line in between them and stuff. And It could work. Like I can see it working with Samara Weaving's portrayal of Scarlet. Like the Joes just kind of came into this movie, and it didn't really seem like they were like doing it for like the good of the clan. It was just like, okay, we got to come in because we're the good guys, and that's what we do, and we want to come in guns a-blazing. Shoot first, ask questions later. So I would love to see them. Exactly. Yeah, I would love to see them analyze that. I don't know if that's what they're going to do with any subsequent sequels, but
yeah. Last thing I'll say is that I think this movie, whether or not you're going to click with it, is after that first big Yakuza scene. And I think that, like, yeah, if you're able to sort of buy what's going on, and then if you're still with it, I think that the first big twist reveal that he's still working with the Yakuza, I really appreciated that because up until that point, I was like, man, this is just so generic. He's he's just sort of being like thrust into this. And I was like, there's something really off about this guy. And I was like, this just isn't working. But then you find out that's the point. The only issue with that for me is that, why do they trust this guy? He is so untrustworthy. It's like, it makes the Shadow Clan seem so dumb. And I was kind of hoping, because like if people who know Japanese and they know G.I. Joe, they'll they'll know right away that Tommy's going to be Storm Shadow. The clan is literally like Arashikage. That is Japanese for Storm Shadow. Like, they're not hiding it very well. But I think that they're hoping American audiences, they don't know Japanese, or they're sort of just like so sucked into the movie that these obvious things are going to kind of blow past them. I was kind of thinking like, oh, maybe this clan is actually evil, and that's the point. And then the Joes are going to be the ones who, you know, the reason he's going to betray them, and they're going to have a falling out, but that's okay because he's going to be with the Joes and they're going to accept him. I think that's where this movie probably should have gone, but instead, I don't know, they just kind of go for the whole like, no, he's just okay. We like him, so he's Henry Golding and he's hot.
He's Henry Golding. I mean, come on. If Henry Golding were sneaking around your clan's little secret jewel hiding spot, and he just said, "Oh, I'm just going for a run at dawn with a sword," I'd believe him. I'd let him do whatever he wants.
I'd be like, "Here's a key in case you want to take a look inside our safe.
Here's some DNA just in case you need anything. You good?"
Yeah, there you go. A little weird, but okay. That's all I got for Snake Eyes. Fun movie.
Yeah, really fun movie.
All right. Well, if you want to check it out, it's going to be in theaters starting July 23rd, depending on when you're listening to this. Should be available by the time you are listening to this episode of Cinemaholics. It is just 121 minutes long. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice, or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.